Welcome to Hearths of Myths. The story begins before the sands of Egypt had ever tasted the bitterness of blood. It begins in a time known to the ancient priests and scribes as Zep Tepi, the first time. This was an epoch when the veil between the divine and the mortal was not merely thin, it was non-existent. The gods did not dwell in distant heavens or behind the invisible barriers of the duat. They walked upon the black, fertile earth of the Nile Valley. They breathed the same air as the reeds and the papyrus. They felt the warmth of the sun upon their skin, and at the center of this golden age, ruling from a throne carved of light and horizon stone, was the Creator himself, Ra. To understand the terror that is to come, one must first understand the perfection that was lost. The world was Ma'at. It was balance, truth, and cosmic order woven into the very molecular structure of existence. The Nile flooded with a precision that was like a heartbeat, nourishing the land without drowning it. The sun rose and set in a cycle of eternal rejuvenation, and humanity, the cattle of Ra, lived in the shadow of absolute divinity. They were created from the tears of the sun god's eye, born of his sorrow and his joy, intended to be the caretakers of his creation. But time, even for a god who dwells within the sun, is a relentless force. As the eons passed, the golden vitality of the first time began to tarnish. The texts of the New Kingdom, specifically the sacred script known as the Book of the Heavenly Cow, inscribed on the golden shrines of Tutankhamun and the walls of the Seti I tomb, describe this transition with a heartbreaking physical intimacy. They tell us that the majesty of Ra remained, but his vessel had begun to age. His bones, once the incomprehensible solidity of the primeval mound, had turned to silver, a metal of purity, yes, but also of coldness and age. His flesh, the source of all warmth, had become pure gold, heavy and unyielding, and his hair, which once flowed like the rays of dawn, was now true lapis lazuli, dark and stiff as the night sky. The Creator had grown old, and with age came a perceived weakness. It is a flaw in the heart of humanity that we often mistake gentleness for frailty and patience for lack of will. In the great cities that clustered along the riverbanks, in the shadow of the god's palace, a murmur began. It started not as a shout, but as a whisper in the marketplaces and the mud-brick homes. It was the sound of ingratitude. Men and women, whose very existence was sustained by the light radiating from Ra's brow, began to speak against him. They looked at his trembling hands, hands that had shaped the mountains, and they saw only a senile king holding on to power he could no longer wield. They whispered that the sun was setting for the last time, that the era of the gods was over, and that the era of man had arrived. This was not merely a political rebellion. It was a cosmic heresy. It was Isfet, chaos, disorder, lie, creeping into the perfection of Ma'at. They plotted in the remote places, in the deserts behind the hills where the light of the sun did not reach deep into the canyons. They gathered their weapons, sharpened their spears, and prepared to overthrow the author of their own lives. They believed that because Ra was old, he was blind. They believed that because he was distant, he was deaf. But the sun is never blind. Ra perceived these things. He did not hear them with mortal ears, nor did he see them with mortal eyes. He felt the betrayal as a physical sickness. The rebellion was a disturbance in the ether, a darkening of the light that he himself generated. The love he had borne for his creation, the tears from which they were born, began to curdle in his chest. It turned into something heavy, hot, and terrifyingly dense. It was the first stirring of a divine rage that would soon consume the world. He did not strike immediately. The Creator is not impulsive. Instead, he called for a council. But this was not a public court for the lesser gods or the spirits of the air. This was a gathering of the primordials. Ra spoke to his attendants, the lower deities who served his daily needs, and gave a command that required absolute secrecy. He told them to summon the Eye. He told them to summon Shu, the god of air and space. He told them to summon Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and rain. He told them to summon Geb, the earth itself, and Nut, the sky that arched over them. And most importantly, he summoned Nun, the watery abyss, the dark, churning chaos from which Ra himself had risen at the beginning of time. The command was specific. Bring them quietly. Let not the multitudes of men see them. Let not their hearts be afraid, lest they flee into the desert. Ra knew that if humanity saw the great powers gathering, they would scatter like beetles into the sand, hiding in the caves and crevices where his justice might not easily reach them. He wanted them gathered. He wanted them unaware. Imagine the atmosphere of that secret conclave. It took place in the great palace, a structure not made of brick and mortar, but of consciousness and light. The gods arrived not as physical beings walking through a door, but as elemental forces manifesting in the presence of their king. Nun, the oldest of all, the father of the gods, spoke first. His voice was the sound of the ocean depths, a resonant, booming tone that vibrated in the silver bones of the king. Nun looked at Ra, who sat upon the throne, his golden skin glowing with a dim, angry heat. Nun addressed him not as a failing old man, but as the supreme power. "My son, Ra," Nun said, "the god greater than he who made him, older than those who created him. Your throne is established. Your fear is great. Let your eye be directed against those who conspire against you." The other gods nodded in agreement. They were not separate from Ra. They were extensions of his will, limbs of his cosmic body. They felt the insult of humanity, as if it were a wound on their own skin. They advised him to remain upon his throne and to unleash the power that resided within him. They advised him to send out the Eye. Here, we must pause to understand the single most terrifying concept in Egyptian mythology, the Eye of Ra. To the modern mind, an eye is an organ of sight. It receives light. It processes images. But in the theology of the Nile, the eye is an active, aggressive force. It is the solar disk itself, the burning circle of the sun. But it is also a separate entity, a feminine aspect of the solar god that can detach itself from him. It is his protector, his daughter, his weapon. It is the part of God that goes out into the dark to destroy the enemies of the light. The eye is jealous, volatile, and fiercely protective. It is the concentrated essence of the sun's heat, not the warmth that grows the grain, but the heat that scorches the desert, the radiation that blinds, the fire that turns sand into glass. Ra looked out from his palace. His glance fell upon the world he had made. He saw the conspirators hiding in the shadows of the rocks, thinking themselves safe, whispering their treason. The love he had felt for them evaporated, replaced by a cold, judicial necessity. The balance of Ma'at had to be restored, and Ma'at is not passive. When order is threatened by chaos, order must use violence to re-establish itself. "Behold," Ra said, his voice crackling like dry papyrus burning. "They are fleeing into the desert, their hearts afraid, because I speak to you." The decision was made. He would not descend himself. He would not sully his golden flesh with the blood of traitors. He would send his daughter. He would send the Eye. At this moment, the goddess Hathor was present. Hathor, the Golden One, the Lady of the West, the goddess of love, beauty, music, and motherhood. She was the most beloved of all deities, the one who greeted the dead with cool water and shade, the one whose laughter was the wind in the sycamore trees. She was the gentlest aspect of the divine feminine, but within Hathor lay a dormant potential, a sleeping duality. The Egyptians understood that the intense passion of love is only a breath away from the intense passion of rage. The mother who nurtures her child is the same creature who will tear the throat out of a wolf that threatens it. Ra turned his gaze upon Hathor. He focused his will, his Heka, the ancient magic of creation, upon her. He poured his anger, his betrayal, and his desire for justice into her beautiful form. He needed a weapon that would not hesitate. He needed a hunter that would not tire. The transformation described in the subtext of the myths is a moment of profound psychological horror. Hathor stood before the throne, her face serene, her eyes filled with the benevolence of the cow goddess. But as the power of the Eye of Ra entered her, she began to change. The benevolence melted away like wax near a flame. Her pupils dilated, consuming the iris, becoming black pools of infinite depth. Her teeth, designed for smiles and song, sharpened. Her nails hardened into claws that could shear through basalt. The golden skin that radiated warmth began to radiate a blistering heat. The air in the palace grew stifling. The other gods stepped back. Even Nun, the primeval ocean, felt a ripple of unease. Hathor was gone. In her place stood something else, something new, something ancient. She was no longer the house of Horus. She was now Sekhmet. Her name comes from the Egyptian word Sekhem, which means power or might. She is the powerful one. She is the one who loves Ma'at and detests evil. She stood in the hall of the gods, and her breathing was the sound of a furnace draft. Her head was no longer that of a woman, but that of a lioness, the apex predator of the African plains, the hunter who works in the sun, the beast whose roar can paralyze prey with infrasound before the blow even lands. She looked at her father, Ra. She did not bow. She did not ask for instructions. She knew. The connection between the Eye and the Source was absolute. She felt the insult of humanity burning in her own blood. "I will go," she said, and her voice was a low growl that vibrated in the floor stones of the palace. "I will go, and I will overpower them for you." The gates of the palace opened. The blinding light of the Egyptian noon flooded in, but the light radiating from Sekhmet was brighter, fiercer. She stepped out. The heat of the desert was her natural element. The sand did not burn her feet. It energized them. She looked toward the horizon, toward the rocky outcrops where the rebellious humans were hiding. The hunt had begun. This was not a war. A war implies two sides fighting. This was an extermination. The humans, in their arrogance, had prepared weapons to fight a senile old king. They had spears of bronze and shields of oxhide. They waited in the wadis and the canyons, setting ambushes, thinking they could trap the sun. They did not know that the sun had sent a lioness. Sekhmet moved with a terrifying speed. To the humans watching from the ridges, it first appeared as a shimmer in the air, a heat haze that moved against the wind. Then they saw the golden form, the red solar disk upon her head, the Uraeus cobra rearing up from her brow, spitting fire. Panic set in. The bravery of the rebellion shattered in an instant. They turned to run, scattering into the deep desert, trying to find holes in the earth to hide from the gaze of the goddess. But a lioness does not chase prey that she cannot catch, and Sekhmet was divine. She descended upon the first group of conspirators near the edge of the cultivation. The texts do not shy away from the violence. It was visceral. It was efficient. She did not use magic spells or lightning bolts from a distance. She used her claws. She used her teeth. She tore through the ranks of men like a scythe through ripe wheat. The sound of the slaughter was masked by the roar of the wind she created. Blood sprayed across the hot sands, sizzling as it hit the ground. The smell of iron and death filled the air, and for Sekhmet, this smell was not repulsive. It was intoxicating. It is crucial to understand this shift. When Hathor became Sekhmet, she did not just become a warrior. She became an addict. The taste of human blood, the sheer vitality of the life force she was extinguishing, awoke a hunger in her that Ra had perhaps not anticipated. It was the red thirst. Every life she ended fed her power. Every scream was a hymn to her glory. She was Ma'at in its most violent form, correcting the imbalance by removing the source of the chaos. By sunset, on that first day, the desert sands were dark with fluid. The rebellion was broken. The few survivors were fleeing in absolute terror, no longer thinking of overthrowing Ra, but only of surviving the night. Sekhmet returned to the palace of Ra as the sun dipped below the horizon. She was covered in the red dust of the desert and the red substance of humanity. She walked into the presence of her father, her eyes glowing with a terrifying luminescence in the gathering twilight. Ra looked at his daughter. He saw the carnage she had wrought. "Welcome in peace," said the majesty of this god. "Hathor, I who has done what I sent her to do." Sekhmet looked at him, and her answer sent a chill through the assembly of the gods. She did not speak of justice. She did not speak of duty. She spoke of pleasure. "By your life," she said, licking the blood from her muzzle, "I have overpowered mankind, and it was sweet to my heart." It was sweet to her heart. This phrase hung in the air like a sentence of doom. Ra had unleashed the destroyer to punish the wicked, to quell a rebellion. He had wanted a surgical strike, a restoration of order. But he saw now that he had created something that could not easily be put back in the box. He had created a force that found joy in destruction. The sun set, plunging the world into darkness. But in the desert, the fear did not sleep. And in the palace of the gods, Ra did not sleep. He looked at the lioness, who was pacing the halls, her tail twitching, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside, waiting for the dawn so she could return to her feast. The rebellion was over, But the punishment had only just begun. The balance had tipped too far. The humans had introduced chaos by plotting against the god, but now the god had introduced a counter-chaos that threatened to wipe out creation entirely. If Sekhmet went out again the next day with the same fury, there would be no one left to worship Ra. There would be no cattle, no heirs, no Egypt. The silence of the desert would be absolute. Ra realized, with the heavy wisdom of his millions of years, that he had to save the very people he had just condemned. He had to stop the machine he had built. But how do you stop a goddess who has tasted the sweetness of dominion? How do you tell the fire not to burn? The night was short. The dawn was approaching, and Sekhmet was ready. She stood at the eastern gate, watching the horizon, her body trembling with anticipation. She was the lady of slaughter, the mistress of dread, and she was hungry. Ra needed a plan. He needed it before the sun rose. He needed something stronger than force, for nothing was stronger than Sekhmet. He needed a trick. He needed a deception that would appeal to the very hunger that was driving her. He called his swiftest messengers. "Run," he commanded. "Run to Elephantine. Run to the Red Mountain. Bring me the red ochre. Bring me the hematite. And summon the high priest of Heliopolis. We have a brew to make." The fate of humanity now rested not on a battle, but on a vast red illusion. The redness of the blood had doomed them. Now, Ra hoped that the redness of the earth would save them. As the messengers sprinted into the night, racing against the inevitable sunrise, Sekhmet sharpened her claws on the pillars of heaven. The silence of the night was heavy, pregnant with the threat of extinction. The lioness waited, and the world held its breath. The sun rose over Egypt, but it was not the dawn of hope. It was the signal for the second slaughter. As the first rays of Ra's solar disk crested the eastern mountains, illuminating the vast stretches of the desert wadis, Sekhmet was already moving. The carnage of the previous day had not satiated her. It had merely awakened a hunger that was as infinite as the void from which creation had sprung. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, the desert, the Deshret, or Red Land, was the domain of chaos, of Seth, of outcasts and demons. But on this morning, the desert belonged entirely to the lioness. She did not run like a mortal beast. The texts suggest a movement that defied the physics of the heavy sand. She flowed across the dunes like liquid gold, a terrifying blur of muscle and divine heat. Her paws, massive enough to crush a chariot, made no sound on the shifting earth until the moment of impact. And when she roared, the sound was not merely a vocalization. It was a weapon of sonic warfare. It shattered the resolve of any human who heard it, freezing their blood, locking their limbs in a paralysis of primal terror. The humans who had survived the first wave of destruction had retreated deeper into the wilderness. They hid in the limestone caves high up on the cliffs. They buried themselves under the sand, breathing through reeds, praying to local spirits, to ancestors, to anyone but Ra. For Ra was no longer their shepherd. He had become their butcher. But hiding from the eye of Ra is a futile endeavor. The eye sees all. Sekhmet could smell the fear. It rose from the earth like a distinct pheromone, sharp and acrid. She could hear the frantic beating of hearts inside the chest cavities of men huddled miles away. To her, the landscape was not empty rock and sand. It was a buffet of pulsing life force, glowing in her vision with the red aura of vitality. She ascended the cliffs. The limestone crumbled under her claws. She reached into the caves where families huddled together in the darkness. There was no negotiation. There was no mercy. The lioness did not speak. She was the executioner of Ma'at, and Ma'at demanded a reckoning. The caves became tombs. The wadis, usually dry except for the rare flash floods of winter, began to flow with a different kind of liquid. The Red Land was becoming red in truth. This phase of the myth, as detailed in the Book of the Heavenly Cow, marks a critical turning point in the theology of the divine. Sekhmet ceased to be merely an instrument of Ra's will. She began to transcend her original programming. She was designed to punish the rebels, the specific group of conspirators who had plotted against the king. But now, she was killing everyone. The distinction between rebel and an innocent had vanished in the red haze of her bloodlust. To Sekhmet, humanity was no longer a collection of individuals with moral value. They were simply prey. They were fuel for her fire. She waded through the blood of men as one wades through the Nile. Her golden coat was matted with it. Her muzzle dripped with it. She drank it, not for sustenance, but for the euphoric rush it provided. The life essence of the created beings, formed from the tears of Ra, contained a spark of divinity, and consuming it was making her stronger, wilder, and more uncontrollable. She was becoming a chaotic force that threatened to rival Apep, the great serpent of destruction. She was order turned into chaos through the excess of its own intensity. Far away, in the safety of the celestial barque, Ra watched. The Golden King looked down from the height of the heavens. He saw the smoke rising from the burning villages on the edge of the desert. He saw the silence spreading across the land, where once there had been the noise of life. The heart of the Creator broke. The anger that had birthed Sekhmet had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening realization. The rebellion had been crushed hours ago. The conspirators were dead. Now, his daughter was eating his children. If he did not stop her, there would be no Egypt left. There would be no one to offer the morning rituals. There would be no one to maintain the temples. The universe would become a silent graveyard ruled by a lone, insane predator. "Call to me my messengers," Ra whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of his regret. "Let them run like the wind. Let them fly like the shadow of a cloud." The messengers appeared, swift-footed spirits who could traverse the length of the Nile in a single breath. Ra gave them a command that seemed at first to be madness. He did not order them to bring weapons. He did not order them to bring armies. He ordered them to bring rocks. "Go to Elephantine," Ra commanded. "Go to the island at the first cataract. Bring me the red ochre. Bring me the hematite stones found in the Red Mountain. And be quick, for the lioness rests only when the sun dies." Elephantine, the city at the southern border of Egypt, was a place of deep magic. It was believed to be the source of the Nile waters, the place where the flood originated from deep underground caverns. But it was also famous for its red granite and its deposits of red ochre, a mineral earth used for pigment. The messengers raced south, covering hundreds of miles in moments, and returned bearing vast quantities of the red stone. While the messengers were gone, Ra turned to the high priest of Heliopolis, the great seer of the sun cult. This figure represents the bridge between divine instruction and human labor. Ra commanded the priest to mobilize the remaining people of the city, those who had not fled, those who were still loyal or too terrified to move. "Grind the barley," Ra ordered. "Make beer. Make more beer than has ever been brewed in the history of the two lands." The scene that followed was one of frantic, industrial-scale production. In the courtyards of the temples of Heliopolis, the surviving women of the city, the grindstone girls, the priestesses, the servants, were gathered. They were terrified. They could hear the distant roars of Sekhmet echoing from the western desert, a sound that made the very stones of the temple vibrate. But they worked. They worked for their lives. They took the barley grain and crushed it. They mixed it with water from the sacred lake. They made the bread dough, half-baked it, and then crumbled it into the vats to ferment. This was the ancient Egyptian method of brewing beer, a thick, nutritious, slightly sweet beverage that was the staple of the diet. But Ra did not want a few jars for an offering. He wanted an ocean. 7,000 jars. The text's act specifies the number. 7,000 vessels of beer. This was a quantity sufficient to intoxicate an army, sufficient to float a royal barge. The vats bubbled and frothed in the heat of the day. The smell of yeast and fermentation rose into the air, mingling with the smoke of the distant fires. But beer is amber. Beer is the color of straw or honey. It does not look like blood. And Sekhmet, in her current state, craved only blood. She would not stop for beer. She would not stop for water. She needed the red essence of life. The messengers returned from Elephantine, their backs bent under the weight of the red ochre stones. Ra himself oversaw the next stage of the plan. The high priest took the red stones and began to grind them. He crushed the hematite until it was a fine, dusty powder, a pigment so red it looked like dried arterial blood. Then the mixing began. The priestesses and the servants took the red powder and poured it into the 7,000 jars of beer. They stirred the mixture with long wooden paddles. The transformation was miraculous and horrifying. As the ochre dissolved into the amber liquid, the beer changed color. It turned a deep, opaque crimson. It swirled with the viscosity of blood. It reflected the light, just as blood does. To the eye, to the nose, even to the initial taste, it was indistinguishable from the fluid that pumped through the veins of humanity. Ra inspected the jars. He saw the 7,000 vessels filled with the sleeping potion, the Didit. He saw that it was good. It was a masterpiece of deception. It was a lie constructed to save the truth. "It is well," Ra said. "With this, I will save mankind from her." But the day was ending. The sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon, the entrance to the Duat, and Sekhmet was returning. She was coming back from the slaughter, her belly full, her rage momentarily quieted by the feast, but ready to rise again with the next dawn. She would sleep for a few hours, dreaming of the hunt, and then she would wake. And when she woke, she would head to the fields where the survivors were hiding. Ra knew her path. He knew where she would hunt tomorrow. She was heading toward the fields of the cultivation, toward the lush green strip of land near the river, where the last of the people were huddled in the tall reeds. "Take the jars," Ra commanded. "Carry them to the place where she plans to kill. Pour them out. flood the fields. Under the cover of darkness, while the lioness slept in the blood-soaked sands of the desert, a silent procession of gods and men moved out of Heliopolis. They carried the heavy clay jars. They moved with the stealth of thieves, terrified of waking the sleeping doom. They reached the designated fields, a low-lying area, a depression in the land that would hold liquid like a bowl. They began to pour. Splash, glug. The sound of the liquid hitting the earth was soft, swallowed by the soil. Jar after jar was emptied. The red beer flowed over the ground. It filled the furrows left by the plows. It pooled in the hollows. It rose higher and higher until the fields were submerged. 7,000 jars of beer created a vast, majestic lake. In the darkness of the night, under the light of the stars and the crescent moon, it looked exactly like a lake of blood. It rippled with a dark, sinister sheen. The smell of the alcohol was masked by the sheer volume of the liquid and the iron tang of the red ochre. It was a trap of monumental proportions. It was a mirror reflecting the violence of the goddess back at her. Ra was betting everything on the hope that Sekhmet's bloodlust would blind her to the truth. He was betting that her addiction was stronger than her wisdom. The work was finished just hours before dawn. The carriers retreated, fleeing back to the safety of the city walls. The fields lay silent, drowning in the red brew. The reflection of the stars danced on the surface of the blood, looking like the souls of the dead waiting to be consumed. Ra returned to his barque. He waited. The tension in the cosmos was absolute. If Sekhmet ignored the lake, if she smelled the deception, she would turn her rage upon the city of Heliopolis itself. She would tear down the gates of the sanctuary and devour the priests who had tried to trick her. The night waned. The stars began to fade. The sky in the east turned a pale, bruised violet. The birds, usually the heralds of the morning, were silent, too afraid to sing. And then she woke. Deep in the desert, Sekhmet opened her eyes. They were not groggy with sleep. They were instantly alert, burning with the fire of the morning sun. She stretched her massive golden body, her claws extending and retracting, digging furrows into the sandstone. She shook her mane, sending a cloud of dried dust into the air. She felt the hunger. It was sharper than before. The previous day's feast had only whetted her appetite. She wanted more. She wanted to finish the job. She remembered the scent of the humans hiding near the river. She remembered the taste of their fear. She let out a roar that shook the morning mist. It was a declaration of intent. I am coming. She began to run. She moved toward the cultivation, toward the fields where Ra had set his trap. She moved with the speed of a bushfire, consuming the distance in great bounding leaps. She was the arrow of the sun, and she would not miss her mark. As she crested the final ridge of the desert, looking down into the valley of the Nile, she stopped. There, spread out before her in the first light of the dawn, was a miracle. She saw the fields, but they were not green with crops. They were red. A vast, shimmering lake of red stretched out as far as she could see. It filled the valley floor, gleaming in the morning light. Sekhmet stared. Her lioness mind processed the image. She did not see beer. She did not see red ochre. She saw the result of a massacre she did not remember committing, or perhaps a gift from the cosmos itself. She saw blood, oceans of it, rivers of it, more blood than she could spill in 1,000 years of hunting. It was right there, waiting for her. No chasing, no hunting, no hiding prey, just a pure, unadulterated feast. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were black voids. Her tail twitched violently. The scent of the liquid drifted up to her, sweet, metallic, earthy. To her enchanted senses, it smelled like the finest vintage of human life. She let out a sound that was not a roar, but a purr, a deep, thrumming vibration that rattled the pebbles on the ridge. She forgot the humans hiding in the reeds. She forgot the conspirators. She forgot her father, Ra. She saw only the Red Lake. She descended the ridge, not with the caution of a hunter, but with the reckless abandon of a starving beast. She rushed toward the liquid. She reached the edge of the beer lake. She did not hesitate. She did not sniff it suspiciously. She lowered her massive head. Her tongue, rough as a rasp and pink as a new wound, touched the surface of the brew. She drank. The taste was sweet. It was rich. It was heavy with the magic of the ochre and the power of the barley. It did not taste exactly like blood, but it was close enough, and the alcohol hit her divine metabolism with the force of a hammer strike. She drank again and again. Great, gulping draughts of the red beer. She lapped it up, swallowing gallons in seconds. The cool liquid soothed the burning heat in her throat. It filled her belly, replacing the hunger with a warm, heavy sensation. She waded into the lake. The blood rose to her chest, staining her golden fur crimson. She was bathing in it, drinking it, consuming the very essence of the deception. She drank until the level of the lake began to drop. She drank until the 7,000 jars were a part of her. And then the change began to happen. The alcohol, brewing in the sacred vats of Heliopolis, began to take effect on the mind of the goddess. The sharp, diamond-hard focus of her rage began to blur. The edges of her vision softened. The driving need to kill, which had been a screaming voice in her head for 2 days, began to quiet down, drowned out by a pleasant, rhythmic buzzing. She lifted her head from the lake. Blood, or what she thought was blood, dripped from her whiskers. She looked around. The world was spinning slightly. The sun, her father, was rising higher in the sky, but he looked beautiful. He looked warm, not searing. She tried to roar, to assert her dominance over the valley, but the sound that came out was not the terrifying thunder of Sekhmet. It was softer. It was almost a hiccup. She swayed on her paws. The mighty lioness, the destroyer of rebellion, the Lady of Flame, was drunk. She was gloriously, divinely, completely intoxicated. She looked at the humans peering fearfully from the distant reeds. She saw them not as prey, not as traitors, but as small, interesting shapes. She felt a sudden wave of affection for them. Why had she wanted to kill them? They were so small. They were so funny. Her eyelids grew heavy. The heat of the day was rising, and the alcohol was pulling her down. She lay down in the mud at the edge of the red lake. The cool earth felt good against her belly. She rolled over onto her back, her paws waving lazily in the air. The fierce fire of the eye had been doused by the flood of the beer. The aggression was drowning in the intoxication. Ra, watching from the heavens, let out a breath that became the cooling north wind. He saw his daughter lying by the lake, harmless, happy, and asleep. The plan had worked. The red ochre had deceived the eye that sees all. The beer had soothed the savage breast. Humanity was saved. But the goddess who lay sleeping in the mud was still Sekhmet, and when she woke up, she would be changed. The hangover of a goddess is a theological event in itself. She would not wake up as the killer she was, but she could not simply go back to being Hathor. The experience of the bloodlust and the subsequent intoxication had created a bridge between the two natures. The lioness had been tamed, but she had not been erased. And as she slept under the mid-morning sun, the people of Egypt crept out of their hiding places, looking at the sleeping giantess with a mixture of awe, terror, and gratitude. They knew that from this day forward, they would owe their lives to the red beer and the cleverness of Ra. But the story of Sekhmet does not end with a nap. Waking up from this divine stupor would require a negotiation of identity that would define the Egyptian religious calendar for 3,000 years. The waking of the goddess was just as dangerous as her rampage, for a confused god is a volatile god, and Ra knew that when she opened her eyes, he would have to be there to give her a new name, a new purpose, and a new face. The duality of the feline goddess, the one who purrs and the one who bites, was about to be established forever in the consciousness of the Nile. The beer had done its work. Now the music had to begin. The sun stood at its zenith. The heat of the Egyptian day was a physical weight, pressing down on the valley of the Nile with the force of a solid object. But in the fields outside Heliopolis, the silence was absolute. The birds had not yet returned. The insects were still. The only sound was the rhythmic, heavy breathing of a goddess. Sekhmet lay in the mud, her golden fur stained with the crimson residue of the didit, the red beer that had saved the world. She had consumed a lake. She had drunk the deception of Ra down to the dregs, and now the Lady of Slaughter, the mistress of dread, was asleep. But sleep for a deity is not a cessation of consciousness. It is a journey into a different realm. As Sekhmet slumbered, the alcohol and the hematite magic worked through her divine system. The sharp, crystalline edges of her rage were being dulled. The fire that had burned in her veins, demanding the blood of rebels, was being smothered by a heavy, warm blanket of intoxication. The red thirst was being replaced by something entirely new to her experience, satiety. And then she began to stir. The waking of Sekhmet is described in the subtext of the temple rituals not as a sudden event, but as a geological shift, a mountain moving, a tectonic plate sliding. Her eyelids, heavy as stone, fluttered open. The vertical pupils, which had been wide black pools of murder only hours before, contracted in the harsh sunlight. She tried to rise. Her legs, usually pillars of unshakable strength, wobbled. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her paws. She let out a low growl, but it lacked the infrasonic terror of the previous day. It was a confused, grumbling sound. She licked her muzzle. She expected the copper tang of human blood, the salt of life. Instead, she tasted the sweetness of barley, the earthiness of ochre, and the distinct fermented sourness of beer. She looked at the empty depression in the earth where the lake had been. The mud was red. Her reflection in a remaining puddle showed a lioness, yes, but one whose mane was matted with brew, whose eyes were glassy. She had been tricked. A flicker of the old rage ignited in her chest. She realized with a slow, creeping dawn of understanding that the blood she had feasted on was a lie. Ra, her father, the king of the gods, had deceived her. He had fed her slop when she demanded sacrifice. She dug her claws into the wet earth, preparing to roar a challenge to the heavens, preparing to vomit the poison and return to the slaughter. But Ra was watching, and Ra knew that this moment, the moment of waking, was the most dangerous. If she rejected the intoxication, if she purged it from her system, the massacre would resume with tenfold fury. She would destroy not just the rebels, but the very earth that had tricked her. So the majesty of Ra descended. He did not come as a warrior. He did not come with thunder or lightning. He came as the beautiful one. He manifested in the field. His light softened. His voice modulated to a frequency of absolute calm. "Peace be with you, sweet one," Ra said. The words hung in the hot air. Sweet one. He did not call her Sekhmet. He did not call her the powerful one. He used a new epithet. Amit, the charming one, the sweet one. Sekhmet looked at him. She swayed on her feet. The anger in her chest fought against the heavy lethargy of the beer. She wanted to bite, but her jaw felt heavy. She wanted to strike, but her limbs felt like they were moving through honey. "Why have you done this?" the lioness asked, her voice thick. "I was drinking. I was feasting. I was finishing your work." "You were finishing the world," Ra replied gently. "And the world is not yet done with its time. Come, my daughter. Come, my beautiful eye. The slaughter is ended. The hunger is fed." He approached her. This was an act of supreme bravery, even for the Creator. To approach a drunk, confused, apex predator goddess is to walk into the mouth of the underworld. But Ra reached out a hand of pure light and touched her muzzle. "From this day," Ra proclaimed, his voice echoing across the valley, "men shall not offer you blood. They shall offer you this. They shall brew the red beer in your honor. Every year on this day, the people of the two lands shall drink as you have drunk. They shall dance. They shall sing. They shall forget their troubles, just as you have forgotten your rage." Sekhmet blinked. The touch of the sun god was warm. The promise of the beer, the memory of that sweet, numbing fullness, was enticing. She felt the tension leaving her muscles. The need to kill was fading, replaced by a desire for rest, for pleasure, for sensation. And in that moment, the transformation occurred. It was not a physical metamorphosis back into the cow goddess Hathor, at least not entirely. It was a psychological shift. The lioness remained, but the spirit within her shifted from the aspect of war to the aspect of ecstasy. This is the birth of the great duality of the Egyptian goddess. She is the one who is whole. She is the lady of the two faces. On one side she is Sekhmet, the inevitable destruction, the sun that burns, the plague that kills. On the other, she is Hathor, or, in some versions, Bastet, the sun that warms, the music that heals, the intoxication that brings joy. They are not two different goddesses. They are two states of the same intense energy. The beer did not change her nature. It simply redirected the flow of her power from death to life. "I am content," Sekhmet murmured. And as she spoke, the heat haze around her seemed to shimmer and resolve into the sound of a distant sistrum, the sacred rattle of Hathor. Ra smiled. Then let us go home. Let us go to the sky. But the myth does not end with her return to the sky. It continues on Earth, in the rituals that kept this piece alive for 3,000 years. The Egyptians did not view this story merely as a history of something that happened once. They viewed it as a perpetual threat. Sekhmet was always just beneath the surface of Hathor. The lioness was always sleeping with one eye open. If she was not constantly pacified, if the rituals failed, she would wake up sober. And a sober Sekhmet is a lethal Sekhmet. Thus was born the Festival of Drunkenness. Imagine the scene in the temples of the Nile, at Dendera, at Karnak, at Bubastis, during the season of the inundation. This was not a solemn, quiet prayer service. This was a theological rave. It was a ritualized reenactment of the myth, designed to keep the goddess in her sweet state. The texts from the Porch of Drunkenness in the Temple of Mut at Karnak describe it vividly. The people would gather by the thousands. They would light torches as the sun set, turning the night into day to honor the eye. They would bring jars of beer, millions of gallons of it, dyed red with ochre or simply brewed strong, and they would drink. Drunkenness was not a vice in this context. It was a sacrament. To be drunk was to be like the goddess. It was to enter into communion with her saved state. The boundary between the human and the divine would blur. Men and women would dance to the rhythmic beating of drums and the shaking of sistrums. The sistrum, a metal rattle, made a sound like wind in the reeds, a sound that was believed to soothe the anger of the lioness. "Pacify her," the priests would chant. "Pacify the great lady. Let her rage be far from us. Let her face be turned toward us in beauty." The festival was also deeply sexual. Hathor is the mistress of sexuality, and Sekhmet is her fierce protector. In the haze of the red beer, the restrictive social norms of Egyptian society were loosened. The energy of life, creation, procreation, joy, was unleashed to counter the energy of death. If Sekhmet was the force that subtracted life, the Festival of Drunkenness was the force that multiplied it. They were fighting death with an explosion of life. The calendar of lucky and unlucky days, Cairo Papyrus 86,637, marks the 20th day of the first month of the inundation, Thoth, as the date of this festival. It says, "Do not go out at dawn on this day. It is the day the goddess goes forth." The danger was still real. Even during the festival, there was a fear that if you crossed the goddess incorrectly, the sweet one would snap back into the powerful one. This duality is the core of Egyptian theology. The universe is not a battle between good and evil. It is a balance between order, ma'at, and chaos, Isfet. But Sekhmet represents a third thing. She is the chaos used to maintain order. She is the violence necessary to preserve peace. She is the chemotherapy of the cosmos, a poison that kills the cancer, but almost kills the patient. As Sekhmet returned to the heavens with Ra, she left behind a changed world. Humanity had survived, but they had lost their innocence. They knew now that their Creator had the capacity to unmake them. They knew that the sun that grew their crops was the same sun that could burn their skin off. The relationship between the gods and men had shifted from one of simple parent-child affection to one of complex, negotiated appeasement. The temples were built not just to honor the gods, but to contain them. The daily rituals, the offering of food, drink, and clothing to the statues were not acts of charity. They were acts of maintenance. You feed the lion so the lion does not eat you. But Sekhmet's transformation was not absolute. She did not become a domesticated house cat. The myth tells us that while she accepted the beer and the peace, she retained her domain over certain aspects of existence. She became the guardian of the boundaries. She became the patron of the desert frontiers. And most terrifyingly, she became the mistress of something invisible, something that could not be fought with spears or shields, something that struck silently and killed without mercy. She became the Lady of Pestilence. The transition from the slaughterer to the Lady of Plague is a logical theological step. In the ancient world, war and disease were twins. Where armies went, sickness followed. The bodies left on the battlefield bred flies, and flies brought fevers. Sekhmet, the goddess of the battlefield, naturally inherited the dominion over the invisible arrows of disease. As the beer wore off in the celestial realms, Sekhmet looked down at the earth she had spared. She saw the humans dancing in their drunken festivals, thinking they were safe. She smiled a feline smile. She would not tear them apart with her claws anymore. That was crude. That was messy. Instead, she would breathe on them. The hot winds of the desert, the Khamsin, which blow in the spring and bring dust and irritation, became known as the breath of the Sekhmet. The sudden fevers that took a child in the night were her arrows. The plagues that swept through a city were her messengers. She had been tamed, yes, but she had not been defanged. She had simply traded her claws for a more subtle, more terrifying weapon. And so the priests of Egypt had to evolve. They could no longer just be brewers of beer. They had to become doctors. The Wab priests of Sekhmet became the first organized medical profession in history. To fight the goddess, you had to know her. To cure the disease, you had to propitiate the source of the disease. The dual nature of Sekhmet thus created the dual nature of Egyptian science. The same goddess who brought the plague was the only one who could cure it. Sekhmet the destroyer was also Sekhmet the healer. The stage was set for a new kind of relationship. The era of the direct massacre was over. The era of the medical war had begun. The Red Lake had dried up, but the 7 arrows of the year were being sharpened in the quiver of the goddess. And as the festival drums faded into the night, the people of the Nile went to sleep with a prayer on their lips. O Sekhmet, Great One, Mistress of the 2 lands, let your heat be the warmth of the sun, not the fire of the fever. Protect us from your own emissaries. The lioness was sleeping, but her dreams were made of fever and fire. The Festival of Drunkenness had ended. The red jars were empty. The torches had burned down to embers, and the music of the sistrums had faded into the quiet hum of the Nile morning. The goddess was pacified. The lioness had been soothed by the beer and the dance, and Ra had welcomed her back into the Solar Barque. But the people of Egypt knew a truth that was written in the very dust of their land. A goddess of such immense power never truly sleeps. She merely changes the nature of her hunt. Sekhmet had been the lady of slaughter on the battlefield, tearing throats and drinking blood. But now, in the settled times of peace, she became something far more terrifying because she became invisible. she became the Lady of Pestilence. She became the mistress of the fever that burns in the blood, the invisible arrow that strikes a healthy man at noon and leaves him dead by sunset. To the ancient Egyptian mind, disease was not a biological accident. It was not a matter of viruses or bacteria, concepts unknown to them. Disease was a possession. It was an intrusion. It was a demon, a spirit, or a breath of divine anger entering the sacred vessel of the body. And the entity that controlled these demons, the one who held the leash of the invisible killers, was Sekhmet. The transition from the blood drinker to the plague bringer is a logical, theological evolution. In the ancient world, war and disease were inseparable twins. When armies clashed, bodies were left to rot in the sun. Flies gathered, water sources were corrupted, and then the heat would rise. The fever would sweep through the camps, killing more soldiers than the spears ever did. Sekhmet, the goddess of war, naturally inherited the dominion over the war that happens inside the veins. The texts speak of the 7 arrows of Sekhmet. These were not physical arrows made of reed and bronze. They were emissaries. They were demons of the air, invisible stalkers who were released at specific times of the year, usually during the transition of the seasons or the low water before the flood, to cull the weak. They were the slaughterers of the year. Imagine the fear of the ancient farmer. He could build a wall to keep out the Bedouin raiders. He could build a dike to hold back the flood. But he could not build a wall against the wind. And Sekhmet was in the wind. Specifically, she was associated with the hot, dry desert winds that blew from the west, the breath of the lioness that withered the crops and dried out the lungs. This fear created a unique necessity. If the goddess was the source of the plague, then logically, she was the only one who could stop it. You do not ask a river god to stop a fire. You ask the fire. Thus, Sekhmet acquired her most beautiful and paradoxical title, Weret Hekau, the Great of Magic, and the Lady of Life. It is here that we find the birth of organized medicine. In most ancient cultures, the priest and the doctor were separate, or at least distinct. But in Egypt, the Wab, priests of Sekhmet, the pure ones, were the surgeons, the veterinarians, and the physicians of the realm. To become a doctor, a SWNW, one had to first become a servant of the destroyer. Why? Because medicine was a form of warfare. The body was a temple under siege. The disease was the enemy soldier breaching the walls. The doctor was the general who had to drive the enemy out. And who better to lead this war than the priests of the war goddess? Let us walk into the house of life, the Per Ankh, attached to the great temple of Karnak or Memphis. This was the university, the library, and the hospital of ancient Egypt. The air here smells of kaifi, the sacred incense, roasted resin, and the sharp tang of medicinal herbs like acacia, garlic, and honey. A patient is brought in. He is burning with fever. His skin is dry and hot to the touch. He is delirious, speaking in tongues, thrashing against his restraints. To the modern eye, this is malaria, or perhaps typhoid. To the Sekhmet priest, this is the breath of the goddess. An arrow has struck him. The treatment begins, and it is a fascinating blend of the empirical and the magical, for the Egyptians saw no difference between the two. First, the priest acts as a scientist. He observes. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, and the Ebers Papyrus, our primary sources for Egyptian medicine, show an incredible level of anatomical knowledge. The priest checks the pulse. The Egyptians knew that the heart, the ib, spoke to the vessels, the metu, of the body. If you place your hand on the head, on the back of the neck, on the hands, on the place of the heart, on the arms, or on the legs, you measure the heart, the texts say. The priest feels the heat. He examines the eyes. He smells the breath. He mixes a poultice of cooling herbs, willow leaves, which contain salicylic acid, the basis of aspirin, honey, an antibiotic, and bread mold, a primitive penicillin. He applies it to the body to draw out the heat of the goddess. But the physical cure is only half the battle. The demon must be exorcised. The arrow must be commanded to leave. The priest changes his role. He puts on the leopard skin robe of the Sem-priest. He picks up an ebony wand carved in the shape of a curved snake or a hand. He lights the incense, and he begins to chant. The incantations found in the magical papyri are not pleas for mercy. They are commands. The priest does not beg the disease to leave. He threatens it, and he threatens it by invoking the name of Sekhmet. "Retreat, O arrow," the priest chants, his voice filling the small stone chamber. "Retreat, you demon of the air. I am the son of Sekhmet. I am the one she loves. If you touch this man, you touch the hem of her garment. Beware, lest she turns her face upon you and devours you." This is the psychological brilliance of Egyptian theology. The priest adopts the persona of the goddess. He becomes her avatar. He uses the terror of her name to scare the demon out of the patient. He fights fire with fire. "I know your name," he shouts at the fever. "You are the wandering fire. You are the breath of the desert. Go back to the red land. Go back to the waste." The patient, hearing this, believes. And in that belief, his own immune system is rallied. The placebo effect in the ancient world was not a trick. It was a divine intervention. If the priest of Sekhmet says you are under her protection, then the demons must flee. But the work of the Sekhmet priest was not limited to humans. They were also the inspectors of the cattle. Before any animal could be sacrificed to the gods in the great temples, it had to be pure. It had to be free of disease. The priests of Sekhmet were the ones who examined the bulls and the geese. They looked for the signs of sickness, the blemishes on the liver, the cloudiness in the eyes. This gave them an unprecedented knowledge of anatomy. They opened up animals daily. They saw the heart, the lungs, the liver, the intestines. They understood how the body worked as a biological machine long before the Greeks, and they attributed this knowledge to the lioness. She, who knows how to tear a body apart, also knows how it is put together. The duality of Sekhmet was woven into the calendar itself. The Egyptians divided their year into 3 seasons: Akhet, inundation; Peret, growth; and Shemu, harvest. But there were 5 days at the very end of the year, the epigomenal days, that were outside of time. These were the days when the gods were born, but they were also the days when the barriers between the worlds were thinnest. The end of the year was the time of greatest danger. The Nile was at its lowest. The stagnant pools bred disease. The heat was oppressive. This was the season of the demon. During this time, the book of the last day of the year was read in the temples. This text is a litany of protection against Sekhmet and her slaughterers. The people wore amulets made of faience, blue-green ceramic, carved in the shape of the lion-headed goddess. These were not cute trinkets. They were shields. The amulet often depicted Sekhmet holding a papyrus scepter, symbol of fresh life, or the Ankh, symbol of eternal life. By wearing her image against your skin, you were engaging in a form of sympathetic magic. "I am yours," the amulet said. "Do not eat your own." There is a specific ritual known as the appeasing of Sekhmet, Hotep, that was performed during these dangerous weeks. The priests would create statues of the goddess, hundreds of them, carved from black granite, a stone associated with the regeneration of the dark earth. They would anoint these statues with the finest oils, offer them linen, and pour libations of wine and beer. The prayer was specific. "O Sekhmet, beautiful one, turn your face away in peace. Let your arrows fly past us. Let your fire warm our hearths, not burn our houses. Be Bastet to us. Be the soft mother. Do not be the red killer." It is important to understand that the Egyptians did not hate Sekhmet for her violence. They respected it. They understood that in a harsh world, you need a harsh protector. A doctor who is afraid of blood cannot save a patient. A king who is afraid of war cannot save a kingdom. Sekhmet was the necessary horror. This connection to healing is why the greatest pharaoh of the new kingdom, Amenhotep III, developed a theological obsession that would result in the greatest single artistic project in the history of Egypt. He was a king who ruled at the height of Egypt's wealth, the Sun King before Louis XIV, but he was also a man who suffered. Forensic examination of Amenhotep III's mummy reveals that he was a sick man in his later years. His teeth were abscessed. His bones were racked with arthritis. He was likely in constant, agonizing pain. The Golden King was rotting from the inside, and so he turned to the only deity who could stop the pain. He turned to Sekhmet. He did not build one temple for her. He decided to turn his entire mortuary temple, the Kom el Hetan on the west bank of Thebes, into a magical machine for healing. He ordered the construction of statues, not 10, not 100, but 730 statues of Sekhmet. Why 730? 2 for every day of the year, 1 for the day and 1 for the night. Imagine the industrial effort required to produce this. The quarries of Aswan and the Red Mountain were filled with dust and noise for years. The master sculptors carved the black granite, one of the hardest stones on earth, into the seated or standing form of the goddess. They are masterpieces of art. The bodies are female, sensuous, clad in tight-fitting sheaths that reveal the curves of a woman. But the heads are terrifyingly realistic lionesses. The whiskers are etched in stone. The ruffs of the mane are detailed. And the expressions, they are serene, yet watchful. They look like a predator that has just fed or is just about to strike. Amenhotep arranged these statues in the courts of his temple. They stood in rows, shoulder to shoulder, a literal army of stone goddesses. The idea was to create a litany of stone. As the sun moved across the sky, its rays would strike different statues at different hours. The king believed that by surrounding himself with the multiple forms of the goddess he could create a magical barrier against his own mortality. He was trying to use the Lady of Life to scare away death itself. The sheer scale of this devotion shows the centrality of Sekhmet in the Egyptian mind. She was not a fringe deity. She was the one you called when the end was near. She was the final line of defense. But Sekhmet's healing aspect went beyond just the physical body. She was also the healer of the Ba, the soul. In the complex psychology of the Egyptians, fear was a sickness. Fear of the dark, fear of demons, fear of the unknown. This fear could paralyze the heart, the I-B, and prevent a person from living in Ma'at. Sekhmet, as the ultimate warrior, was the antidote to fear. Her priests offered protection of the bedroom. Nightmares were considered attacks by hostile spirits. To sleep soundly, one might place a headrest decorated with the image of the lioness under the neck. "My head is the head of Sekhmet," the sleeper would whisper. "I do not fear the night." She was the fierce mother who stood by the crib. She was the lady of the flame who burned away the bad dreams. In this way, the terrifying goddess became a source of profound comfort. It is the paradox of the guard dog. The bigger and scarier it is, the safer the family feels. As the centuries passed, the medical knowledge of the Sekhmet priests spread. The Greeks, when they came to Egypt, marveled at the Egyptian doctors. They called Imhotep the god of medicine, but behind Imhotep stood the shadow of the lioness. The symbol of the snake on the staff, which we associate with Asclepius and modern medicine, has roots in the Egyptian Heka, the magic wands used by the priests to drive out the worms of disease. The House of Life continued to operate until the very end of the pagan era. And even when the temples fell into ruin, the statues of Sekhmet remained. They were too heavy to move, too scary to destroy. The later inhabitants of Egypt, the Copts and the Arabs, looked at these black statues with a mixture of superstition and respect. They told stories of the jinn that lived in the stone. They rubbed the statues for luck or to cure infertility. The power of the archetype remained. The idea that healing requires a fight, that the cure is a battle, is a legacy of Sekhmet. When a modern surgeon cuts into a body to remove a tumor, they are enacting the ancient role of the Sekhmet priest, using a knife, the claw, to remove the chaos, the disease, and restore the order, the health. But Sekhmet's role was not limited to the earth. Her primary function, the reason for her creation, was always celestial. She was the eye of Ra. And while she hunted microbes in the bodies of men, she also had a nightly war to fight in the heavens. She had to protect the sun from the ultimate evil. The universe of the Egyptians was a cycle. The sun had to die every evening and be reborn every morning. But the night was not empty. The night was the domain of Apep, the serpent of chaos, the anti-creation. And to fight a dragon, you need a monster. We will see Sekhmet in her true original glory, the fire-spitting cobra, the Uraeus, the guardian of the horizon. Prepare yourself. The air is thinning. The light is blinding. We are entering the court of the sun. The lioness is taking her place on the throne of flame. The healing halls of the temples were places of quiet murmurs and the scent of crushed herbs, where the battle against death was fought on the intimate scale of the human body. But Sekhmet was not created merely to be a doctor, nor was she born to be a guardian of the sickbed. These were secondary functions, ripple effects of her true nature. Her primary existence, the reason for her very being, was to serve as the ultimate weapon in a war that spanned the cosmos. To understand her fully, we must leave the mud-brick villages of the Nile and ascend. We must go to the horizon. We must step onto the deck of the Solar Barque. In the theology of ancient Egypt, the sun was not a celestial object obeying the laws of gravity. It was a ship. It was the man-jet, the boat of millions of years. It sailed across the sky during the day, a golden vessel of light, carrying the life force of the Creator, Ra. And at night, it transformed into the Sekhmet, the night bark, plunging beneath the western horizon to navigate the terrifying pitch-black waters of the Duat, the underworld. This journey was not a peaceful cruise. It was a military procession through hostile territory. The sun was the source of Ma'at, order, truth, existence. And because of this, it was the primary target of Isfet, chaos, uncreation, the void. Every single night, as the sun dipped below the earth, the forces of non-existence gathered to extinguish the light. If they succeeded, time would stop. The universe would dissolve back into the primeval soup of Nun. The sun would never rise again. The captain of this ship was Ra. But a king does not fight his own skirmishes. He needs a champion. He needs a bodyguard who can stand on the prow of the boat and stare into the face of absolute darkness without blinking. He needs the eye. On the Solar Barque, Sekhmet undergoes another transformation. She is no longer just the lioness. She fuses with the iconography of the cobra. She becomes the uraeus. This is the wadjet, the rearing serpent found on the forehead of the pharaohs and the gods. Why a snake? Because the cobra does not blink. The cobra flares its hood to look larger than it is. The cobra strikes with a speed that the eye cannot follow. And most importantly, the cobra spits fire, venom that burns like acid. Sekhmet stands at the very front of the boat. She is the Lady of the Flame. In the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, her role is described with visceral intensity. She is the living flamethrower of the gods. As the boat enters the 7th hour of the night, the darkest, most dangerous hour, the enemy appears. Apep. The Greeks called him Apophis. He is the great serpent of chaos. He is not a god. He is the anti-god. He is the embodiment of everything that Ra is not. He is the static noise that tries to drown out the symphony of creation. He is vast, coiled, and hypnotic. His gaze can paralyze the crew of the solar boat. His roar is the sound of thunder in the underworld. He seeks to swallow the sun disk, to drink the light. When Apep lunges from the sandbanks of the underworld river, the other gods on the boat, Heka, magic, Sia, perception, Hu, authoritative utterance, tremble. They use their spells to keep the boat moving. But Sekhmet does not tremble. She does not cast spells. She acts. The myths describe the encounter as a clash of wills, as much as a clash of forces. Sekhmet, the eye of Ra, meets the gaze of the serpent. She projects the full, undiluted power of the sun's nuclear core through her eyes. This is the solar blast. It is a radiation of divine heat that incinerates the darkness. "I am Sekhmet," she declares in the Litany of Ra. "I am the one who severs the spine of the enemy. I am the one who burns the coils. I am the Red Lady who drinks the blood of the dark." She leaps from the prow. The lioness-cobra hybrid falls upon the serpent. It is a battle of tearing claws and burning venom. She rips the flesh of chaos. She decapitates the snake. Though being chaos, he can never truly die. He must be defeated every single night. The red of the dawn sky is often interpreted poetically as the blood of Apep, spilled by Sekhmet to clear the way for the sunrise. Every morning that the sun rises over the eastern mountains of Egypt, it is a victory parade. It is proof that Sekhmet has won. The world breathes a sigh of relief. Ma'at is upheld for another day. The solar court, the assembly of gods who travel with Ra, praises her. She is the great of magic who allowed time to continue. This cosmic function made Sekhmet the ultimate protector of the king. The pharaoh was the son of Ra on earth. If Sekhmet protected the father in the sky, she naturally protected the son on the throne. She was the divine mother who stood behind the chair of state, her hands resting on the shoulders of the monarch, breathing fire on his enemies. But in the 18th dynasty, during the golden age of the New Kingdom, one pharaoh took this relationship to an obsessive, architectural extreme. Amenhotep III, the Magnificent, the Sun King. He ruled Egypt at the zenith of its power and wealth. Gold was as dust in his time. The empire stretched from the Euphrates in the north to the Sudan in the south. But as we touched upon earlier, Amenhotep III was a man in pain. The forensic analysis of his mummy reveals a tragedy hidden beneath the gold masks. He suffered from severe dental abscesses, which can cause agony that radiates through the entire skull. He likely had arthritis and perhaps other degenerative diseases. For a living god, pain is a theological problem. If the pharaoh is perfect, why does he suffer? Amenhotep III, in his later years, turned his eyes toward the one deity who controlled the arrows of pain. He turned to Sekhmet. He conceived of a project so vast that it baffles archaeologists to this day. At his mortuary temple in Qom el-Hetan, on the west bank of Thebes, modern-day Luxor, he decided to build a litany of stone. The Litany of Ra is a sacred text that lists the 75 forms of the sun god. Amenhotep wanted to manifest this litany physically. He ordered the creation of statues of Sekhmet. The numbers are staggering. We have found the remains of at least 730 statues. Some scholars believe there may have been more. 730. Why this number? The Egyptian year consists of 365 days. Amenhotep commissioned 2 statues for every day of the year, one for the day and one for the night. A standing Sekhmet to represent the active, solar, daytime protection. A seated Sekhmet to represent the passive, lunar, nighttime healing. Imagine the logistics. The quarries at Gebel el-Ahmar, the Red Mountain, and Aswan were mobilized on an industrial scale. The hardest stones, granodiorite, black granite, were chosen. These stones are associated with regeneration and the fertile black earth of the Nile. They are incredibly difficult to carve. Yet, The master sculptors of the king produced hundreds of them, each one a masterpiece. The statues are not identical. They have subtle variations. The ruff of the mane, the holding of the scepter, the papyrus stalk, symbol of green life, or the ankh, symbol of eternal life, the expression on the feline face. Some look fierce, others look serene. Some seem to be about to roar, others seem to be listening. Amenhotep III arranged these statues in the courts and hypostyle halls of his temple. It was not just a gallery. It was a circuit board. It was a magical machine. The theory is that the statues were arranged in a calendar formation. Each day, the priests would perform rituals before two specific statues, the Sekhmet of the day and the Sekhmet of the night. They would awaken the specific aspect of the goddess required for that moment in time. As the sun moved across the sky, its rays would strike different statues, activating a continuous, rolling wave of protection. It was a force field. Amenhotep III was trying to create a perpetual motion machine of healing. He believed that if he could surround himself with the multiplied power of the lioness, no demon of sickness could touch him. He was trying to shout down his pain with the roar of 700 lions. Walking through the temple of Kom el-Hetan in ancient times must have been an overwhelming experience. The temple itself was colossal, larger than Karnak is today, but it was destroyed by an earthquake shortly after Amenhotep's death. The statues, however, survived. They were too heavy to be washed away, too durable to break easily. When the temple fell, the statues were buried in the mud, or moved by later pharaohs, like Ramesses II, to their own temples. But the sheer quantity of them means that today you can find a Sekhmet of Amenhotep III in almost every major museum in the world. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Met, the Turin Museum, the Vatican, they all have one. She is the most ubiquitous goddess in Egyptian art, largely due to one man's fear of death and pain. But there is a deeper layer to this litany. Amenhotep III began to identify himself with the solar disk, the Aten, in a way that presaged the heresy of his son, Akhenaten. By creating this army of Sekhmets, he was not just asking for healing. He was asserting his role as the master of the cosmos. He was saying, "I am Ra. These are my eyes. I command the destruction and the healing of the world." The texts inscribed on the back pillars of these statues give us the epithets of the goddess, revealing the scope of her power. She is called the Mistress of Dread, the Lady of Slaughter, she who mauls, the one before whom evil trembles, but also the Lady of Life, the Great One of Healing, the Beloved of Ptah. This brings us to her family. In the great city of Memphis, the old capital, Sekhmet was part of a triad. She was the wife of Ptah, the creator god who spoke the world into existence, the patron of craftsmen. And they had a son, Nefertem. Nefertem is the god of the lotus blossom. He is the beautiful, fragrant flower that rises from the primeval waters. It seems a strange child for a war goddess, a delicate flower born of a lioness. But in Egyptian thought, it is perfect. The lotus is the symbol of rebirth and sweet perfume. From the fierce heat of the sun, Sekhmet, and the creative solidity of the earth, Ptah, comes the beauty of life. Nefertem. Nefertem is also a god of healing and aromatherapy, so the family unit covers the entire spectrum of creation: construction, Ptah, destruction/protection, Sekhmet, and rejuvenation/beauty, Nefertem. In the later periods, Sekhmet's identity began to merge with other goddesses, specifically Mut. Mut was the mother goddess of Thebes, the consort of Amun. At Karnak, the great temple complex, Mut absorbed the aggressive qualities of Sekhmet to become Mut Sekhmet. The annual festivals involved sailing her statue on the sacred lake in the shape of a horseshoe, the Isharu, which represented the calming waters that soothed her rage. The Litany of Stone of Amenhotep III serves as a bridge between the mythic past and the ritual present. It shows us that the myth of Sekhmet was not just a story told to children. It was a technological reality for the state. The king spent the GDP of an empire to clone the goddess 700 times. He believed in her reality more than he believed in the reality of the stone itself. And perhaps he was right, because even though Amenhotep died, even though his temple crumbled into the mud of the Nile, the statues remain. They stand in the galleries of the world, staring at the modern crowds with that same unblinking leonine gaze. They are still the watchers. When you stand before one of these granite Sekhmets today, you are looking at a localized node of a cosmic network. You are looking at a weapon that was deactivated but never disassembled. The Ka, the spirit of the goddess, was believed to inhabit these statues. And in the silence of a museum, away from the noise of the modern world, if you look into her stone eyes, you can almost feel the heat. You can feel the potential energy of the Eye of Ra, waiting for the command to wake up. But how did the priests keep her asleep? How did they manage this nuclear energy on a daily basis? The answer lies in the daily ritual. The care and feeding of a goddess was a dangerous job. A mistake could mean plague. A dropped jar could mean drought. We will explore the intimate daily life of living with a monster, who is also your mother. The rituals of appeasement are about to begin. The incense is lit. The sistrums are ready. The statues of Amenhotep III stood as a silent army of granite, a litany of stone designed to protect a dying king. But a statue, in the Egyptian conception, is not merely a piece of art. It is a vessel. It is a physical anchor for a divine frequency. And a vessel that contains the essence of Sekhmet is not something you simply place in a corner and forget. It is a nuclear reactor. It requires constant, meticulous, and terrifying maintenance. If the containment field of ritual is breached, the fallout, the plague, the anger, the chaos leaks out into the world. Thus, the daily life of a Sekhmet priest was one of high stakes. In the great temples of Karnak, Memphis, and Leontopolis, the city of lions, the service of the goddess was not a passive meditation. It was an active, perpetual negotiation. Let us stand in the shoes of a Hemnetcher, a servant of the god, in the pre-dawn darkness of an ancient Egyptian temple. The air is cool, the sky outside still bruised with the purple of the coming morning. The temple complex is a city within a city, but the heart of it, the Holy of Holies, is silent. The priest approaches the sanctuary. He has bathed in the sacred lake 4 times, twice during the day and twice during the night. He has shaved his entire body, head, eyebrows, lashes, to ensure absolute purity, for lice and hair are unclean. He wears only the finest white linen, starched and pleated. He has chewed natron salts to sweeten his breath, for one does not breathe foul air onto a goddess. He stands before the great wooden doors of the shrine, the naos. The doors are sealed with a bolt of bronze and a lump of clay stamped with the seal of the temple. Inside this box lives the goddess, or rather, her Ba, soul, has descended into the cult statue during the night to rest. The priest breaks the clay seal, but he does not do it with his own hands. He recites a spell. It is not I who opens this. It is Thoth who opens it for me. It is Horus who breaks the seal. He disassociates himself from the act, fearing that if he wakes her as a mortal, she might strike him. He approaches as a fellow god. The doors creak open. The smell of old incense, cedar wood, and the faint mineral scent of the stone wafts out. A single oil lamp flickers, casting long shadows. And there she is. The cult statue is not the colossal granite version we see in museums. It is smaller, perhaps life-sized, made of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and obsidian. The eyes of the lioness glint in the lamplight. The priest falls to his belly. He kisses the ground. "Awake in peace," he whispers. "Awake beautifully in peace, O Sekhmet, Eye of Ra. Wake up so that the land may wake up." He stands and begins the toilet of the goddess. This is an intimate, terrifying service. He takes the statue out of the shrine. He removes the linen cloth she slept in. He washes the stone limbs with water from the sacred lake, purifying the vessel. Then he dresses her. He takes strips of colored linen, green for health, red for power, white for purity, and drapes them over the golden form. He offers her jewelry, broad collars of turquoise and carnelian, bracelets for her wrists. He treats the statue as a living queen, but the most crucial part is the makeup. The priest takes a palette and grinds the green malachite, wadje, and the black galena, coal. He carefully applies the paint to the eyes of the lioness. This is not for vanity. In Egyptian thought, to make up the eyes is to restore sight, to bring the god to full consciousness, to open the eye so she can see Ma'at. While he works, he chants the litany of Sekhmet. He lists her names. He flatters her. "You are the Great One," he sings softly. "You are the one who guides the king. You are the one who is mighty of flame. You are the beloved of Ptah." Flattery is a weapon. By reminding her of her greatness, her beauty, and her protective role, the priest is steering her intent. He is steering the Red Lady away from the red thirst. Then comes the meal, the reversion of offerings. Great trays of food are brought in, roast geese, thousands of loaves of bread, onions, figs, grapes, and jars of wine and beer. The food is placed before the statue. The Egyptians did not believe the statue ate the physical food. They believed she consumed the ka, the spiritual essence of the meal. After a suitable time, the food is removed and later eaten by the priests, a practical way to sustain the temple staff. But for Sekhmet, there is a specific addition to the menu. The priest offers the menat and the sistrum. The menat is a heavy, beaded necklace with a counterweight, associated with Hathor. The sistrum is the sacred rattle. The priest shakes the sistrum before the lioness's face. Shh, shh, shh. The sound is like the wind in the papyrus reeds. It is a soothing, hypnotic white noise. Be pacified, the priest chants. O golden one, take the sistrum. Let your heart be cooled. Let your rage be forgotten. He is reminding her of her other self. He is showing Sekhmet the tools of Hathor, trying to trigger the transformation from war to joy. If he succeeds, the day will be peaceful. The sun will shine, but not burn. If he fails, the priest fears that he might drop dead of a sudden heart seizure right there in the sanctuary. This ritual is performed 3 times a day: morning, noon, and evening. It is a constant cycle of waking, feeding, soothing, and putting to sleep. But there are times of the year when the daily ritual is not enough. The ancient Egyptian calendar was solar, consisting of 12 months of 30 days, making 360 days. But the solar year is 365 days. The remaining 5 days were added at the end of the year. These were the epigomenal days, the days upon the year. They were considered birthdays of the gods: Osiris, Horus, Seth, Isis, Nephthys, but they were also a tear in the fabric of time. They were dangerous. They were the demon days. During this time, and during the transition to the new year, the season of Akhet, the inundation, the power of Sekhmet was at its zenith. The stagnant waters of the low Nile were breeding grounds for disease. The heat was unbearable. The book of the last day of the year gives us a glimpse into the terror of this season. It lists the 7 arrows of Sekhmet and the slaughterers who walk the land. These are demons with names like He Who Looks Behind Him and the One with the Knife. They are invisible assassins. To protect themselves, the people of Egypt turned to Heka, magic. They wore amulets. The most popular was the Sekhmet amulet. Archaeologists have found thousands of these small faience figures. They depict Sekhmet standing or seated, often holding the Waj scepter. Papyrus. Why papyrus? Because papyrus represents the green, fresh, life-giving power of the marsh. By holding it, Sekhmet is signaling that she is in her life-bringing mode, not her desert-burning mode. Mothers would tie these amulets around the necks of their children with a cord made of 7 knots, 7 to bind the 7 arrows. They would recite spells over the knots. I have bound the arrow. I have sealed the mouth of the lioness. She shall not eat my child. She shall pass over my house. In the homes of the common people, away from the great stone temples, worship was more personal. We find stellae, small stone plaques carved with images of ears and the goddess. A petitioner would go to a small shrine, perhaps a chapel of the hearing ear, and whisper their prayers to the stela. O Sekhmet, great of power, a woman might whisper. My husband burns with the fire. His skin is hot. Take back your arrow. I will offer you beer. I will offer you a goose. Please, cool his blood. It is a relationship of desperate intimacy. They loved her, but they feared her more. However, Sekhmet was not always a lone figure of terror. In the theology of Memphis, the old capital of the north, she was domesticated into a family unit. This is the Memphite triad. Her husband was Ptah. Ptah is the intellectual creator. He is the god who conceived the world in his heart and spoke it into existence with his tongue. He is the patron of craftsmen, architects, and builders. He is stable, calm, intellectual, and creative. Sekhmet is his opposite. She is emotional, volatile, destructive, and reactive. Together they form a perfect balance. The mind, Ptah, and the power, Sekhmet. The plan and the execution, the architect and the enforcer. Their son is Nefertem. He is the god of the blue lotus. He represents beauty, perfume, and the rising sun. But he also has a hidden aspect. The texts call him the lion with the sweet smell. He is his mother's son. He can be dangerous, but usually he represents the softened, beautiful outcome of his parents' union. This family unit was crucial for the stability of the Egyptian state. It showed that even the most destructive power could be married to wisdom and produce beauty. It was a political metaphor. The pharaoh, who often identified with Nefertem or Horus, uses the power, Sekhmet, guided by wisdom, Ptah, to create Ma'at. But Sekhmet was not the only lioness in the Egyptian pantheon. The Egyptians observed the natural world closely. They saw that lionesses live in prides, that they are the primary hunters, and that they are fierce mothers. This observation spawned a complex genealogy of feline goddesses. It is easy to confuse them, but the distinctions are vital. First, there is Bastet. In the early dynasties, Bastet was also a lioness. She was fierce, but over time she evolved into the cat goddess, the domestic cat. Bastet is the Lady of the East, associated with the rising sun, the home, fertility, and gentle heat. Sekhmet is the Lady of the West, associated with the setting sun, the desert, war, and scorching heat. They are often called the sisters. There's a famous Egyptian saying, "She is Bastet in the home, but Sekhmet when angry." Every woman had the potential to be both. Then there is Tefnut. She is the goddess of moisture and rain, the daughter of Ra. In the myth of the distant goddess, Tefnut runs away to Nubia in the form of a lioness, raging and killing, until Thoth, wisdom, persuades her to come back. This myth is almost identical to Sekhmet's story, and often the two are conflated. But Tefnut is elemental moisture. Sekhmet is elemental fire. And finally, there is Pakhet, she who scratches. She is a hunter goddess of the Middle Desert, a fierce, solitary feline who patrols the wadis where the flash floods occur. She is sharper, wilder, less royal than Sekhmet. Sekhmet stands above them all as the supreme warrior. She is the one who wears the solar disk. She is the one who breathes fire. The rituals of appeasement reach their peak in the New Kingdom. We have texts describing a ritual called the Offering of the Truth, Ma'at. The priest would present a small statue of the goddess Ma'at, a woman with a feather on her head, to the statue of Sekhmet. "I offer you Ma'at," the priest says. "I offer you truth, for truth is your food. You live on truth." This is profound. It implies that Sekhmet's rage is actually a hunger for justice. She destroys because the world is unjust. If you feed her justice, if the king rules well, if the courts are fair, if the poor are fed, then she is satisfied. She does not need to eat people if she is fed righteousness. This transformed Sekhmet from a mindless monster into the ultimate guardian of ethics. She became the cosmic police force. If plague struck a village, the people would ask, "What did we do wrong? Where did we fail Ma'at?" The temple walls of Kom Ombo, Edfu, and Philae are covered with scenes of the king offering wine and cool water to the goddess. The emphasis on coolness is constant. "Cool the heart of the majesty," the texts say. Even the architecture of her shrines reflected this. They were often dark, with small windows to limit the harsh sunlight. They were designed to be caves, cool stone dens where the lioness could rest away from the irritation of the heat. In the final days of Egyptian paganism, as the Roman legions marched across the sands, the cult of Sekhmet remained strong. The Romans, who respected power above all else, were fascinated by her. They equated her with their own goddesses of vengeance, but they could never quite capture the nuance of the Egyptian theology. They saw the monster, they missed the mother. The Egyptians knew that you cannot have life without the capacity for death. You cannot have health without the immune system's violent war against disease. Sekhmet was the embodiment of this hard truth. As we prepare to enter the final chapter of our saga, we must follow the Egyptian soul on its ultimate journey. We have seen Sekhmet in the desert, in the beer hall, in the hospital, and in the temple. Now, we must see her in the tomb. When a man dies, he goes to the west. He enters the duat. He faces the trials of the underworld. He needs a guide. He needs a protector. And who better to guide you through the valley of the shadow of death than the one who owns the shadows? The priest blows out the lamp in the sanctuary. He backs out of the room, sweeping away his footprints with a broom so that no trace of a mortal remains. He seals the doors with clay. "Rest in peace, Eye of Ra," he whispers. But in the underworld, the sun is setting, and Sekhmet is just waking up. The journey of the soul is about to begin, and the lake of fire awaits. The temple doors are sealed. The incense has burned down to a pile of cold, gray ash. The priests have returned to their cells, and the great silence of the Egyptian night has fallen over the valley of the Nile. But for the ancient Egyptian, death was not an end. It was a horizon. It was a threshold that had to be crossed. And just as Sekhmet guarded the boundaries of the physical world, the desert edge, the temple gate, the body's immune system, she was also the supreme guardian of the ultimate boundary, the line between the living and the dead. We descend now into the duat, the underworld. To the modern mind, the afterlife is often a vague concept of clouds or peace. To the Egyptian, it was a geography. It was a physical place located deep beneath the earth or in the belly of the sky goddess Nut. It was a land of rivers, mountains of fire, gates of iron, and demons armed with knives. It was a place where the soul, the Ba, could easily be destroyed, eaten, or erased from existence. This second death was the true terror of the Egyptian psyche. To die once is natural. To die twice is to be unmade. And in this terrifying landscape, the soul needed a weapon. It needed a guide who was more frightening than the monsters it would face. It needed Sekhmet. The primary guidebook for this journey is the Book of Coming Forth by Day. known commonly as the Book of the Dead. This is not a Bible. It is a survival manual. It is a collection of spells, passwords, and maps designed to help the deceased navigate the dangers of the duat, and Sekhmet is omnipresent in its shadows. When the deceased wakes up in the tomb, they are vulnerable. Their body is wrapped in linen, their organs stored in canopic jars. They must begin the journey to the Hall of Judgment. But the path is blocked by gates. The texts describe these gates vividly. The gate of the knife, the gate of fire, the gate of darkness. At each gate stands a guardian. These are grotesque beings with names like Swallower of Shadows or Breaker of Bones. They demand a password. They demand proof of power. Here, the deceased invokes the lioness. "Back, you slaughterers," the soul cries out in spell 145. "I know you. I know your names. I am the son of Sekhmet. I have come from the house of flame. The Lady of Dread is with me." This is the principle of Heka magic in its purest form, identification. The soul does not ask Sekhmet for help. The soul becomes Sekhmet. By claiming her lineage, by wearing her mask, the deceased appropriates her terrifying aura. The demons of the gate see the fire in the soul's eyes, the reflection of the lioness, and they step aside. They do not fear the man. They fear the mother. But the journey is not just about passing gates. It is about transformation. The soul must cross the lake of fire. In Christian theology, a lake of fire is hell, a place of eternal punishment. In Egyptian theology, it is a place of testing and regeneration. It is a pool of liquid flame, surrounded by baboons who screech at the rising sun. For the wicked, the enemies of Ra, the agents of chaos, the lake is destruction. They are burned, consumed, annihilated. But for the righteous, the Ma'akeru, true of voice, the lake is nourishment. They drink the fire. They bathe in it. It burns away their mortality, their impurities, their heavy earthly nature. They emerge from the flames not as burnt corpses, but as ox, shining, transfigured spirits. And who is the mistress of this lake? It is Sekhmet. She is the fire itself. She is the Nesersur, the island of flame. She determines who burns and who shines. The vignettes in the papyri often show the lake colored red, the same red as the beer of the destruction myth, linking the two concepts. The destructive power of the goddess has been repurposed into a refining fire. "I drink the flames," the deceased says in the pyramid texts. "I eat the fire of the eye. It is sweet to my throat." This is the ultimate paradox of Sekhmet. She is the consumer of life, but she is also the provider of eternal life. Without her fire, the soul would remain cold, heavy, and unable to ascend to the stars. She provides the escape velocity needed to leave the orbit of mortality. As the soul approaches the final trial, the weighing of the heart, the tension mounts. The hall of two truths is vast. Osiris sits on the throne. Anubis adjusts the scales. The heart of the deceased is placed on one side. The feather of Ma'at, truth, is placed on the other. We know the monster Ammit, the devourer, part crocodile, part hippo, part lion, waits to eat the heavy heart. But Ammit is merely the executioner's dog. The authority behind the execution is often linked to Sekhmet. In some variations of the Book of Gates, there is a specialized area of the underworld called the Place of Destruction. Here, souls who have failed the test are handed over to the slaughterers of Sekhmet. These are the entities that chop the soul into pieces, ensuring it can never reassemble. It is a gruesome image, but essential for cosmic hygiene. If the wicked were allowed to exist, they would infect the afterlife with chaos. Sekhmet is the surgeon who removes the cancer from eternity. She ensures that the afterlife remains a paradise by ruthlessly culling those who would spoil it. However, for the successful soul, the one whose heart is light as a feather, Sekhmet becomes the Lady of the West. She embraces the deceased. The texts speak of being gathered into the arms of the goddess. This is not a gentle, grandmotherly hug. It is the embrace of a lioness protecting her cub. It is fierce, possessive, and absolutely safe. No demon would dare approach a soul held in the paws of Sekhmet. She guides them to the field of reeds, the Aru. This is the Egyptian paradise, a perfected version of the Nile Valley where the grain grows 7 cubits high and the flooding is always perfect. Even here, Sekhmet has a role. She guards the perimeter. She ensures that Isfet, chaos, never breaches the walls of paradise. She is the eternal border guard of heaven. This mythological cycle, birth, destruction, pacification, healing, and protection in death, completes the circle of Sekhmet. She is there at the beginning, breathing fire into the enemies of the king. She is there in the middle, testing humanity with plague and curing them with medicine. And she is there at the end, standing at the gate of eternity with a knife in her hand, asking the ultimate question, "Are you true?" But why does she endure? The temples of Egypt are ruins now. The statues of Amenhotep III are in museums, stared at by tourists who do not know the spells. The beer is no longer brewed red. Yet, of all the Egyptian pantheon, Sekhmet remains one of the most compelling and instantly recognizable figures to the modern mind. Perhaps it is because she represents an archetype that the human psyche cannot afford to lose. In Jungian psychology, this is the shadow. It is the part of ourselves that we repress, the rage, the violence, the hunger, the animal nature. Civilization tells us to be polite. It tells us to be calm. It tells us to be ma'at. But deep down, we know that there is a lioness inside. We know that there is a part of us that wants to roar, to fight, to defend what is ours with lethal intensity. Sekhmet is the validation of that feeling. She tells us that anger is not always evil. Rage can be holy. Violence can be protective. For the modern woman, Sekhmet has become a powerful symbol of unbridled feminine power. She is not the passive mother figure. She is not the obedient wife. She is a king in her own right. She bows to no one but the Creator, and even then, he has to trick her to control her. She represents the refusal to be victimized. She is the no that echoes with the force of an earthquake. And for the modern world, obsessed with health and fearful of pandemics, her dual nature as the Lady of Plague and the Lady of Healing is more relevant than ever. We understand now, better than perhaps the Victorians did, that nature is not kind. It is a balance. The same biology that creates life creates viruses. The Sekhmet, who brings the fever, is the same Sekhmet who teaches us how to cure it. We are still fighting her war. We just use vaccines instead of amulets. The legacy of Sekhmet is also found in the very concept of the ferocious protector. We see it in our stories, our movies, our literature. The character who is dangerous, but on our side. The weapon that must be handled with care. The nuclear option. Every time we speak of fighting fire with fire, we are invoking the strategy of Ra against Sekhmet. As we stand at the end of this long journey, looking back over the thousands of years of history, the red beer, the stone statues, and the papyrus spells, we are left with a feeling not of horror, but of awe. The ancient Egyptians did not worship monsters. They worshipped reality. They looked at the sun and saw that it could give life or death. They looked at the lion and saw majesty and murder. They looked at the human body and saw fragility and resilience. They took all of these contradictions and bound them together in the form of a woman with the head of a lioness. They named her Power, Sekhmet, and they spent 3,000 years trying to understand her, love her, and survive her. The fire of the hearth is burning low now. The shadows in the room are getting longer. The story of the complete saga of Sekhmet has been told, from the first drop of blood in the desert to the final weighing of the heart in the hall of truth. It is said in the ancient texts that to know the name of a god is to have power over them. But in the case of Sekhmet, knowing her name is simply a way to ask for her protection. We do not control the storm, we only build shelter against it. As you go about your life, walking through the modern world of concrete and glass, remember the lioness. Remember that there is a fire that burns to destroy, and a fire that burns to purify. Try to keep your own fire balanced. Try to find the sweetness after the rage. And if you ever find yourself walking through a museum, and you see a black granite statue of a woman with a lion's face, holding a papyrus scepter, stop for a moment. Look into her eyes. Do not be afraid, but do not be disrespectful. Give her a nod. Acknowledge the power, and perhaps, just perhaps, whisper the ancient greeting. Awake in peace, beautiful one. Thank you for listening to Hearths of Myths. This journey into the deep desert of the soul has been a long one, and I am grateful you walked the path with me. If you found value in this story, if you felt the heat of the sun and the cool of the temple stone, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep the fire burning and the stories alive. May your heart be light as a feather. May your arrows of protection remain sharp. And may the Lady of the Flame always turn her gentle face toward you. Sleep well.